A good plan, violently executed now, is better than a perfect plan executed next week. George Patton. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode number 19 of the Gap Fillers podcast. My name is Michael Bradford, and let's get started here. It was just announced a couple hours ago that former President Biden has prostate cancer. I know it kind of feels like you want to celebrate if you're a Republican, some of that stuff. I have a hard time sympathizing with politicians personally of any stature, but let's pray for him because like everyone, he needs Christ and he needs repentance. So let's pray for him on that. In other news, the Florida legislature is still gridlocked between DeSantis and the House of Representatives. The Senate seems to be locked in, ready to go with DeSantis's version of the bill with a slightly higher spending. And then Perez in the House, Representative Perez, who's the current speaker, is still in gridlock. So we'll cover that a little bit. But the another main issue that I want to talk about today is Toney Ortiz from Orlando. He's Orlando city commissioner. He has switched parties from Republican to Democrat, and we'll talk about that. And then lastly, I want to talk about the Jacksonville Illegal gun registry. Apparently, Jacksonville has been running undercover gun registry, so we'll talk about that. So, let's start with this. I really want to talk about this form of principle called the tragedy of the commons first. So the tragedy of the commons was first developed in Aristotle. He basically analyzed in his work Politics that basically that which is not owned gets abused, right? So this is the direct quote: "That which is common to the greatest number has the least care bestowed upon it. Everyone thinks chiefly of his own, hardly at all of the common interest, and only when he is himself concerned as an individual is he actually concerned." So that basically sums up the tragedy of the commons. So it really became famous with a guy named Garrett Hardin. He wrote an essay in 1968. Basically, he was concerned about overpopulation, and ironically, we're concerned about depopulation in the world right now. Too few people are having kids, and basically the amount of we're kind of running the historical norm for a civilization that's getting ready to reach its peak. When civilization's growth looks like a pyramid, where the next generation, every continuing generation is larger than the previous, it grows, right? And it becomes wealthier. As it becomes wealthier, it starts to look more like a straight column, right? So it kind of, the base gets narrower, which means that there are fewer kids to support, or fewer working class people to support the retirees or what have you. So that either means we have to raise the retirement level, or you have to lower their benefits. Just by the nature of how that works, either that, or you have to make the less population more productive per capita, and that might be where AI saves us. Maybe not. We'll see. Anyways, so the idea is that with overpopulation, that what was going to happen is that the world was going to run out of resources. So in his pamphlet, he said, "Therein is the tragedy. Each man is locked into a system that compels him to increase his herd without limit. In a world that is limited, so scarcity, ruin is the destination towards which all men rush, each pursuing his own best interest in a society that he believes in freedom of the commons. Freedom in the commons brings ruin to all. Now, he is arguing for basically a form of eugenics, and that is the absolute wrong take to have from that. Okay? This is the idea that happens, this is the problem that happens with a lot of philosophers, especially in economics. They observe a truth, a wrong, tragedy of the commons is an actual issue. But just like Marx, the coalescing of resources into what he considered the bourgeoisie, the upper class, and draining resources from the proletariat. That's and what he thought was the right resources. Well, everybody should be even. Well, that's not right. Just like just like Hardin's observation in the Tragedy of the Commons is also not right. Okay, so the best way to kind of think about the Tragedy of the Commons is, say you have a public pond, say like in Orlando, Lake Eola, right? So say Lake Eola is stocked with fish. We get here, nobody's ever fished Lake Eola before, but Orlando just says, hey, you can fish Lake Eola. Okay, so as long as every so often, maybe there's 10 fishermen and they each take maybe one or two fish out every so often, not that big of an issue, right? However, one person realizes that he could sell the fish to all the other people, so it benefits him, which it actually does, to catch as many fish as possible. Say he catches 10 fish. Well, in order to, he can either, the other fishermen can either buy his fish, which prevents them from having to spend the time fishing, or they have to catch more fish, and they in a kind of monistic way, they have to outcompete him. Right? So now it's in their interest to catch 10 fish and 20 fish and 30 fish. And basically, because they don't own the fish until they catch it, it benefits them to catch the most fish. Right? And what ends up happening is that everybody knows that the pond is going to run out of fish. But if I stop fishing, the other person's just going to catch the fish instead of me. So it becomes this slippery slope right down to, okay, I talked about, I forget that Italian's name off the top of my head. Basically, it becomes this slope where I have to benefit myself, and it ends up being the cycle where there ends up being no fish left to catch. Now, if one person owned the pond, now, I would have specifically only take as many fish as it was feasible to replace, right? So if I could replace the fish, if the fish, either through natural, procreation or through maybe stocking the fish pond artificially, I would basically continue in the most efficient manner in order to keep the amount of fish going. But what ends up happening is, because it's a common lake, a common resource, it ends up being an issue where I don't care. I need just to produce as many fish as possible. And what you end up with is the lack of fish. And so that's where private property ends up being one of the most efficient ways basically capitalism ends up being the ideal economic system because of that. So because basically it allows for the continuation of a resource as much as possible. It uses it in the most efficient way. Machiavelli is the guy I was thinking of. It's basically the Machiavelli kind of thinking. Basically, I got to do what's right for me, and every other, who cares about principles and resources, especially if somebody else is just going to do that. So That's the tragedy of the commons, is that a common in England was, think of like a green, right, or a common held thing that was owned by, say, the city or the state, and what that actually demands is tyranny. Basically, it demands regulation. If something is held in common, it demands some sort of something to hold everybody back from the tragedy of the commons. Um, I have gotten into freshwater fishing a little bit, and the idea that I need a license to fish is kind of absurd. Now, will a license keep me from fishing if I don't abide by the if I don't respect the law? No. As long as I'm not fearful of being caught, I don't care if I need a license or not. So, and basically it ends up basically hurting the people that respect the law, right? That want to live in a society and agree, even when it doesn't benefit them, to hold back, right? And same thing goes with limits and all that stuff. And so the idea is, culturally, in a society in a Machiavellian society, where I need to push as far as possible, maybe that's more Faustian, where I need to get as far as possible, and I have a common resource that if I don't morally hold myself back with principle, I don't need to catch this many fish. I don't need to go past this. It's self-restraint, not restraint from the government. That's tyranny, but restraint through personal application. Overall, it's the rejection of decadence. This is something that happens, when a society becomes too rich. It becomes self-indulgent and becomes decadent, and basically tries to outpace everyone, and the society ends up becoming non-cohesive. You can see that throughout history. The English ran into it with the aristocracy. The Romans ran into it. The Greeks ran into it. Pretty much every modern society, even the ancient city-states like Babylon and the Assyrian Empire had some form of top-heavy aristocratic class that ended up destroying itself out of its own success. So that's basically my cultural analysis for the day. But let's dig into some news here. Toney Ortiz. This is from the Orlando Sentinel. Sorry, I had to find the right tab here. Toney Ortiz has officially switched his party from Republican to Democrat. Now, I want to start off by saying this. The Orlando city government is theoretically nonpartisan. All right? They don't run with a party theoretically backing them. Now, all that is a technicality backdoor, right? We all know when somebody is a Republican or Democrat. It's getting easier and easier to tell liberal judges, a Democrat judge from a Republican judge, although it's still not as easy to tell a Republican judge from a Democrat judge, or you never know when a Republican, a conservative judge is gonna actually, might just side with the Democrats. There's that one lady in the Supreme Court, whose name escapes me, but that's kind of what I think of, or John Roberts for that matter. For the greatest example, screwing the U.S. over with his decision on Obamacare. Anyways, so he has officially switched parties. Toney Ortiz, he's been in the city commission for 17 years, which doesn't surprise me. He's the district number 2 in Orlando, basically between Cimarron and Conway. Which is fairly conservative, at least compared to most of Orlando. Out of the 7 city commissioners, he was one of 2 registered Republicans. See, like you can always look up somebody's party registration. So you can tell that he's registered as a Republican, now he's registered as a Democrat. There's one other They talk about it later in this article. But he describes himself as a Ronald Reagan Republican, right? He says the Republican Party is not the party I signed up with. Well, basically he's describing himself as a neocon for the most part. For the last 40 years, people have, especially on the Republicans, have claimed Ronald Reagan as a sort of like the ideal president to live up to. He stood up to he kind of rallies the neocons to his side because he stood up to the USSR and Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall. Great. But he also had one of the largest amnesties in American history. Right? The idea was that we'll do an amnesty first for all the illegals that are here, and then we will, secure the border. Well, one happens and not the other. Surprise, surprise. So, because, you can secure the border in theory, and then, as we saw with Biden, just let them through. So, you don't need new laws. You need actual presidents to enforce the law. And I think the dereliction of that duty might actually be an impeachable offense, particularly because you're basically allowing an invasion, right? You don't know who's coming through that border. You don't know what drugs are coming through that border, right? So that ends up becoming a huge issue because there's so many things that happen because of that, right? You might even you weaponize your empathy, right? See, this is what drives me nuts with the Democrats, especially. A lot of the Republicans, I'll get to them in a second, but the Democrats weaponize this empathy, right? If I would do it, I need to allow somebody else to do it, right? This is idiotic. This is like playing a chess match, right? And then making dumb moves in order to let the opponent win, because I would have made those moves if I was them, right? Oh, because I was up, I did better in the starting of the chess match, and now I have to let them win because that's the moves I would have made. It doesn't make any sense, right? You weaponize your empathy for you see children who as a whole are not responsible for their parents' actions. However, the Democrats won't punish the parents in order to not punish the kids, which is wrong. There's a verse that the sins of the father are on the son. Okay, so basically what happens is you end up allowing this even if the family isn't bad, they're coming over with other bad people at the same time, and you can't stop one without stopping the other. Now, there's a debate to be made on who should be allowed and like how much legal immigration we should have, and I think especially with a declining birth rate, it's actually more important to restrict the amount of immigration because you end up being where they came from if you let too many of say Colombians in or say Panamanians or whoever, Venezuelans, whoever. If you let too many immigrants in without being without becoming American, you end up just becoming a small part of wherever country they're from, and that becomes a structural issue in an already divided society, right? We're so divided, even as Americans that have been here for 100 years, almost 300 years, on one of my sides. We have been here for over 300 years, and there's some other people that have been here for 100 years, 50 years, or whatever. There's actually a debate going on that's right now about when does somebody become native, right? So one side of my family has been here for almost 300 years. Okay, how is that not native, right? I kind of take the view if no one is alive that knows the first person here that was here, you're pretty much native. You have zero connection now to the land where you have immigrated from, right? So if you were born, if your parent or say an ancestor or whatever came over here in the 1850s, right? they had kids, and no, and then the great grandkids and the great grandkids never knew, the person, and they're the only ones left alive, then I would consider them native. I think that's a pretty good way of kind of structuring that. But anyways, back to this. So Ortiz basically he's basically getting ready to run for mayor, is what it's looking like. So it's right now the mayor, Buddy Dyer, has announced that he's going to leave after 2027. He announced that last year or earlier. Yeah, late last year, I believe he did. And then Anna Escamani, who is a representative in the state legislature here, she's the only one that has filed paperwork to run. Now, this might be just a structural change for him, kind of, hey, look, I'm a Democrat, run with a, obviously nonpartisan, but with I'm aligned with the Democrats now, kind of thing. Because there are 96,000 more Democrats in the city of Orlando than there are Republicans. So that really is probably, it's mushy. He was never a principled person to begin with, if you're going to be able to change on a hat just like that. So he basically said in an announcement listing attacks on Medicaid expansion and the erosion of social safety nets. Well, let me tell you, if you don't have kids and you don't have a working class, a person working from early teen or late teens all the way up till their 60s, if you don't have as many of those, you can't support the people that are now living 20 years longer than when Social Security and Medicaid were first brought about in the 30s, right? Or Medicaid was brought about later, but it's the same principle, right? If you're going to have more people on benefits for longer, you need more people to produce those benefits. So you have to steal. Taxation is theft. You have to steal from the current generation to give to the past generation. The people who are relying on these social safety nets. Now, I understand, there are people who legit cannot work, due to age. But the idea that we should, I need to be retired, Social Security and all that at 66. Listen, there are oftentimes 20 good years left that you could do something. Now, you don't have to work your butt off. I covered this in previous episodes. But the idea that you can't work at all, bring in an income, contribute to society, you basically become a welfare leech, right? Oh, well, I paid into it. Yeah, but you paid into it with less stable dollars 30 years ago, and you didn't pay in enough because obviously people are living longer. In Social Security and all that, when the average, the expected age of life expectancy in the 30s was in the 60s. Right now, it's in the 70s, late 70s, maybe early 80s. Okay, there are plenty of people, living into the 80s. It's not unheard of. It's very common now, right? So the idea that you don't need to either contribute more, which becomes an issue because especially if you're sacrificing the now for the later involuntarily, that becomes a huge issue, or you need to sacrifice the people who didn't put in as much, and that becomes a huge issue as well. But Social Security was insolvent to begin with because there was people who didn't work their entire lives, and even in say in the 50s or the 60s that were on Social Security, they didn't contribute their entire life earnings to this thing that doesn't exist anyways. Eventually, it was that lady from Britain that said eventually you run out of other people's money, and that's exactly what Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare are. They're considered social safety nets, but what they end up doing is that they end up degrading the structure of families and society. Right? You no longer have to depend on your son or your grandkids to support you. You can depend on the government, who at the point of a gun took money from you your entire life in order with the promise of giving it back to you with depreciable returns. Right? returns that that barely match, if ever match inflation. So that becomes a huge issue. And you don't have to depend on your community, your church, whatever, to help you as you get older. So basically you end up with what happens now is these childless cat ladies, as J.D. Vance brought up in the not having kids and then expecting the government to feed them into their old age after they stopped working, if they ever did work. Most of these things are most of these these people are not even, they don't contribute to society. Oh, well, I do my art. Well, I do this. Even if you're in finance, you barely contribute to society. Pick up a tool, for goodness sake. Anyways, back to this. All right, so and then he attached political theater used to target LGBTQ. See, this is bogus. Punish public schools teachers and erase inclusive history from classrooms. And then he also goes on to mention the book banning. Okay, all of those are Democratic talking points that have basically been, they're bogus points, right? The Democrats didn't even hold any of these views, besides maybe the Medicare and safety nets, until like 10 years ago. And maybe at most 20 years ago. Obama and Hillary Clinton were both anti-LGBT until the 2008 race. So the idea, no, even after that, because they were both ran against that. It was really after Obama's first term that became a huge issue, primarily because, again, it's weaponized empathy. It doesn't matter what the benefit of a society as a whole, but I feel bad, and that's the choice I would make if I were them. Look, it's true. If I was in South America, in a country that was disjointed and run by cartels, I'd try to escape to America too. I'd probably try to be an illegal immigrant, for goodness sake. That doesn't mean I have to allow them. Right? Because if I would expect them to try to keep me out too. It doesn't mean I have to allow it as an American. Just the idea that I have some sort of benefit of luck of the draw lottery being born at this time in American history, that doesn't mean I have to allow people to destroy it. Right? The more people that actually are here that don't actually contribute 100% as much as they can to society are a dead weight. Now, I'm not saying that we should become some state thing that's run. No, I'm saying culturally, we should, as individuals, make a clear choice to advance America as much as possible. Not through some tyranny, not through some government-mandated program. Those, first of all, will never work, and second of all, they're always antithetical to whatever they do, whatever they claim to do, because they try to be a self-licking ice cream cone. They're just there to satisfy themselves, to keep that going as much as possible. We saw that with the Republicans for the longest time on pretty much every issue. See, I told you I was going to get to the Republicans. That. On issues of abortion, on spending issues, for goodness sake. Still to this day, we can't get a bill passed that cuts spending. It's ridiculous. Trump and Doge talk a good game, and for the most part, they're there. But then the second a Republican tries to do that, tries to cut the spending. The Republican, no, I gotta do my thing. See, it's all that Machiavellian self-interest thing. And the Democrats are just, they're the kekistocracy, the rule by the worst possible people. So you got the Marxist and kekistocracy, excuse me, on one side, and you got the Machiavellians on the other side. And then you have a few principled people that try to stand up and actually do something, and they're always the ones that are shot down. Anyways, I'll get off my soapbox on that one. So basically, Ortiz is getting ready to gear up for this upcoming election. There's not much else to it. The last thing I want to get to today is this investigation into a legal gun registry. This is from Jacksonville News 4. This is, was it an NBC? Yes. Actually, I'm not sure what it is. Some sort of local affiliate. It kind of looked like NBC. Anyways, let me get to it. So this basically there have been current and former city employees that have been subpoenaed. This is a quote: "A security checkpoint standard operating procedure directed security officers to the recorded names, photos, ID, age, and weapon types when a person enters one of the buildings carrying a firearm." So basically, if somebody entered into a place carrying a firearm, one of the city buildings, they were kind of the name was kept in some form of registry. So nine people have been subpoenaed by the state attorney's office. Let me see if I can get to the heart of the story. The subpoenas asked for, among other items and texts, emails and texts from several current and former city officials matching terms like guns, weapons, and registry. Okay, so they basically kind of used public, their public phone and public emails. They include current Chief Administrative Officer Kara Bowling, former Acting General Counsel Bob Rhodes, former General Counsel Jason Teal, and former Public Safety Chief Lakeisha Burton, who also co-chaired Mayor Donna Deegan's administration. Okay? All right, so basically what has happened here is that these 9 people seemingly or allegedly have created this basically shadow registry of gun owners in the state. So it's kind of ridiculous. The city officials said they first became aware of the issue on April 21st, like 3 weeks ago, and the state's attorney's office asked for the logbooks the following day. So they were basically holding on to these logs outside of official areas. And they basically were kind of creating the shadow kind of government here, or not government. No, the Democrats are. No, that's a whole different story. I'll get into that later. But they're kind of creating the shadow registry to kind of cover up their kind of they're holding basically kind of the whole thing that gun owners fear is that they're going to be reported, that somebody's going to come after their guns, right? And what ends up happening with this is this happens with veterans for the most. They don't want to be red flagged, so they don't report their PTSD that they have. This happens. A lot of different stuff happens like that. So, we'll as more of that comes into comes to light, I'll comment more on that. But if you want to support the podcast, please subscribe on YouTube. That YouTube seems to be promoting my channel the most. Spotify gets me into the 100 of impressions, whereas YouTube seems to get me into the thousands. So I truly appreciate it. Subscribe, like, comment. Follow me on Spotify. Click the bell for so you never miss an episode. Follow me on X at GapFillers1776, and then on Facebook it's the Florida Gap Fillers podcast. I appreciate it, and have a good week.